My name is Eris Thorne. I am 38 years old, and for most of my life, I have been a student of ghosts. Not the spectral kind that rattle chains in old houses, but the quieter, more persistent ghosts of history. I am a specialist in cultural preservation with a doctorate in classical art and archaeology. My work involves advising the U.S. government on how to navigate the delicate tapestries of ancient cultures during modern conflicts. I translate the silent language of stone and soil, of forgotten rituals and sacred artifacts. On a crisp autumn afternoon in Washington, D.C., however, I was the one who felt like a ghost, haunting the periphery of a world I had never truly belonged to. I sat in the third row of the atrium hall at the National Heritage Institute, a magnificent cathedral of glass and pale marble. Sunlight streamed through the vast skylights, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny, forgotten stars. The air was still and reverent, smelling of old paper, floor polish, and the faint, collective perfume of ambition. The room was filled with the intellectual elite of the capital, academics in tweed, sharp-suited policy advisors, and a formidable contingent of high-ranking military officers, their uniforms a stark, disciplined navy blue against the hall's soft tones. For them, the occasion was a symposium on global strategy. For me, it was a family reunion of the most excruciating kind. In the front row, seated with the honored guests, were the two men who had defined the architecture of my life. My father, retired General Sterling Blackwood, was a man who seemed carved from the very granite of a war memorial. His posture was an unyielding testament to a lifetime of command, his presence a gravitational force that bent the room around him. Beside him sat my older brother, Major Julian Blackwood, the Golden Son. He was the brilliant reflection of my father, a West Point graduate whose career path was a straight, ascending line toward the stars on a general's shoulders. They were the sun and moon of the Blackwood family cosmos, and I, a distant, quiet planet, forever caught in their orbit, never sharing their light. My father had not acknowledged me since my arrival. He didn't need to. I felt his disapproval as a physical pressure, a familiar weight on my shoulders. He was here to be celebrated, a titan of military history. Julian was here as its gleaming future. And I, Dr. Thorne, was the odd, academic footnote in their glorious narrative, a mandatory inclusion to complete the picture of a family that was, on paper, perfect. Just breathe, Eris, I told myself, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Just be a quiet ghost. Be invisible. It was a survival tactic I had honed over decades. The symposium proceeded with predictable elegance. Papers were presented, panels were discussed. I focused on the intricate pattern of the marble floor, a spiraling nautilus of cream and rose, tracing its lines with my eyes to keep myself anchored. Then, the director of the institute, a willowy woman with a voice like smooth silk, stepped to the podium for the closing remarks. And now she began, her voice echoing softly in the grand space. We wish to honor a unique contributor to our national security, someone whose work, though often quiet, prevents conflict and preserves the soul of the places our soldiers must go. For her groundbreaking work in cultural de-escalation, which has on multiple occasions diffused conflicts and saved American lives. I felt it before I saw it, a subtle, tectonic shift in the atmosphere. I saw my father's shoulders, always so straight, lock into a plank of rigid iron. And then, the impossible happened. He stood up. Not with the polite deference of an attendee, but with the abrupt, commanding motion of a man accustomed to halting armies. He stepped into the aisle, raising a hand not in a wave, but in a command. The director's voice faltered, then died. A profound hush fell over the hall. 1,000 rustling papers and polite coughs were extinguished in an instant. My father's voice, the same battlefield baritone that had echoed across parade grounds, thundered through the hall's pristine sound system. He was not addressing the director. He was addressing the world. I must object to this sentiment, he boomed, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. Cultural de-escalation? Ancient artifacts? What utter nonsense. A collective, horrified gasp was sucked from the air. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. This country was built by warriors, he bellowed, his finger jabbing the air for emphasis. It is protected by men and women with rifles in their hands, not by soft academics reading dusty books in a library. Every head in that room turned. First, they looked from my father, this icon of American strength, to the bewildered director on stage. Then, their gazes began to skitter across the crowd, 1,000 pairs of eyes searching, questioning, and then, like iron filings snapping to a magnet, they all found me. The only person in the room who fit that description. The general's daughter. The soft academic. My brother, Julian, standing dutifully beside our father, did not flinch. He didn't look embarrassed or ashamed. He simply watched the spectacle unfold, a faint, triumphant smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the look of a checkmate delivered with absolute certainty. My world didn't crack, it disintegrated. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, blocking out the shocked whispers that had begun to erupt like small fires across the hall. A hot, searing wave of shame crawled up my neck and flooded my face. I was exposed, flayed open in a room full of my peers, my colleagues, my superiors. And my own family was holding the knife. But just as the humiliation threatened to drown me, another voice cut through the chaos. It was calm, clear, and radiated an authority that had no need to shout. General Blackwood. General Maddox, a decorated 4-star officer from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had risen from his seat in the front row. He was a quiet, formidable man whose reputation was built on intellect and integrity, not volume. He fixed my father with a gaze as cool and hard as polished steel. Then his eyes found mine across the room. "Dr. Thorne, would you please come up here?" he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The Institute needs to hear from its archivist." The silence that fell this time was different. It was heavier, deeper, laced with a sudden, profound respect. The archivist. I heard someone murmur the name from the row behind me. My own code name, given to me by General Maddox himself on a past assignment, a name of honor I had never heard spoken in public. My legs felt like they were moving through water. My body, on some distant, numb autopilot, began to move. I stood. I put one foot in front of the other. And then, a small miracle occurred. As I started my long, solitary walk down the aisle, a single elderly professor in the 5th row stood up. Then another, a young female captain in the military section. In a quiet, rolling wave, the entire room began to rise to its feet. Scholars, diplomats, lieutenants, colonels, even the other generals in the front row. They all stood, not in salute, but in a silent, powerful gesture of solidarity. They were not standing for my father. They were standing for me. I kept walking, my gaze locked on General Maddox. I walked right past my brother, whose smirk was now frozen on his face, a grotesque mask of disbelief. And then I walked past my father. He was still standing in the aisle, his body rigid, his face a ghastly, bloodless white. For the first time in my life, I saw not anger, not disappointment, but pure, unadulterated shock in his eyes. I did not look away. I let that image burn itself into my memory as I walked toward the stage, toward the man who called me the archivist, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me. The storm had finally broken. That image of my father's face, ashen, defeated, stripped bare of its godlike authority, should have been a victory. But as I stood on that stage, the respectful silence of the hall wrapping around me like a blanket, I felt no triumph. Instead, his shocked expression became a key, unlocking a door to a memory I had long kept bolted shut. The polished marble floor of the Institute dissolved, and suddenly I was 18 again, standing on the heart-pine floor of our historic home in Charleston. It was Christmas Eve. Our house, an elegant pre-revolutionary war single house with wide piazzas and the scent of jasmine and salt marsh in the air, was filled with the rich, comforting aromas of tradition, the spicy scent of my mother's gingerbread, the fresh pine of the towering Christmas tree in the drawing room. The air should have been warm, filled with laughter and love. But in the Blackwood household, warmth was a rationed commodity, reserved for celebrating the achievements of its men. All day, I had been clutching a secret, a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the crest of the University of Oxford. It felt like a passport to another universe. It was an acceptance letter for a coveted fellowship at the Bodleian Library, a full ride to study ancient manuscripts. It wasn't just an acceptance, it was an escape. It was my life's dream, printed in elegant, navy blue ink. I had hugged it to my chest, my heart thrumming with a nervous, hopeful energy, waiting for the perfect moment to share my triumph, to finally earn a sliver of the approval that was heaped so effortlessly upon my brother. That evening, our dining table, a magnificent piece of 18th-century mahogany, was crowded with relatives. Aunts and uncles in their holiday finery, all orbiting the gravitational center of our family, my father. He sat at the head of the table, a king presiding over his court, and next to him, the crown prince, my brother Julian, home for the holidays from his first year at West Point. Julian was the sun, and every conversation was a planet revolving around him. The stories were endless, his grueling training, the respect he commanded from his peers, the glowing praise from his superior officers. He absorbed it all with a practiced, humble confidence that I knew was pure performance. I sat silently, pushing a piece of honey-glazed ham around my plate, feeling my own light dim until I was nothing more than a shadow at my own family's table. I was invisible. Finally, as the dessert plates were being passed, I saw my chance. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the envelope from the pocket of my velvet dress. My voice was small, barely a whisper. "Dad, I have something." I slid the letter across the polished wood. He picked it up, his eyes glancing at the prestigious Oxford crest without a flicker of interest. He didn't even open it. He set it down, not in a clear space, but next to a dish of discarded oyster shells, a place for refuse. He looked at me, his gaze flat and unimpressed. Then his eyes shifted to Julian, and a familiar pride softened his features. He raised his voice, ensuring everyone at the table could hear his verdict. "A fellowship. To read old books." He said the words as if they were a diagnosis of a strange and frivolous illness. "More books, heiress. Look at your brother." He gestured toward Julian with his fork. "He's learning how to lead men. How to defend this nation. That is a legacy. That is strength. What are you going to do with a dusty manuscript? Use it to stop a bullet." The cheerful chatter around the table ceased. A thick, uncomfortable silence fell. I could feel my cheeks burn with a heat so intense it brought tears to my eyes. It felt as if 1,000 tiny needles were pricking my skin as I felt the pitying stares of my aunts and uncles. They looked away quickly, suddenly fascinated by their empty plates. Across the table, Julian just shrugged, a perfect pantomime of indifference. But I saw it, a glint of cruel satisfaction in his eyes. He had won again, without even trying. The final, killing blow came with the after-dinner toast. My father stood, raising his crystal glass of brandy. "Everyone," he announced, his voice once again booming with pride. "A toast. To Cadet Julian Blackwood. The pride and the future of the Blackwood family." A chorus of "Hear, hear," and "To Julian" echoed through the room. Glasses clinked together in a cheerful, ringing celebration of my brother's glory. No one mentioned my name. No one glanced my way. My achievement, my dream, was left to die on the table. My letter, the most important piece of paper in my young life, lay forgotten. A single, dark smear of port wine now stained the corner of the envelope like a wound. That night, I cried in my room, the silent, heaving sobs of someone who has finally understood their place in the world. I clutched the one thing that felt like a shield, a heavy, worn copy of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, a gift from my late grandmother. She was a scholar, a lover of history and philosophy, a gentle soul in a house built on military steel. She was the one who had planted the love of the past in me, who taught me that ideas had power, that understanding was a bridge. "Eris, my love," she used to tell me, "your mind is your fortress. Don't ever let anyone breach its walls." But as I sat there, the tears soaking the thin pages of her gift, I realized that in this house, under this roof, my fortress was seen as a prison. It didn't make me strong, it made me a target. It didn't make me valued, it made me a disappointment. And a question, cold and sharp, pierced through my grief. Why? Why do I keep fighting for the approval of a man who will never give it? Why do I keep trying to win a game that is rigged from the start? That question, born from the tears of an 18-year-old girl, became the engine of my new life. Why play a rigged game? The answer was simple. You don't. You walk away from the table and build your own. After completing my doctorate at Oxford, I didn't return to Charleston. I built a life in Washington, D.C., carving out a niche for myself as a civilian consultant. It was my own quiet rebellion, a way to serve my country on my own terms, using the very skills my father disdained. My first major assignment was at Fort Graymore, Washington, a base perpetually shrouded in a cold, drizzling rain that seemed to seep into your bones. The landscape was a monotonous palette of gray and green, beautiful in its own stark way, but overwhelmingly somber. The professional climate inside the base was even colder. I was an anomaly, a civilian, a woman, and a PhD in a world of rigid military hierarchy. They called me the Professor, a nickname that dripped with a mixture of bemusement and sarcasm. In daily briefings, I would try to explain how a region's folklore or the history of a particular tribal rivalry could inform a mission, only to be met with blank stares or polite, dismissive nods. My commanding officer, a colonel who believed every problem could be solved with superior firepower, once told me point-blank, "Dr. Thorne, I need soldiers who can clear a building, not analyze pottery shards." My work reflected their opinion of my value. I was relegated to the most tedious tasks, translating historical documents, writing cultural background reports that I knew no one would read. I was isolated, my expertise treated not as a strategic asset, but as a bizarre and useless hobby. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion in the gray, damp air. But I refused to break. The girl who cried over a stained envelope was gone. In her place was a woman forged in quiet fire. I took their disdain and turned it into fuel. I didn't complain. I worked. I arrived earlier than everyone and stayed later. I spent my nights in the base library, cross-referencing ancient maps with modern satellite imagery, drawing connections no one else could see. I used my own money to buy rare books on ethnography and linguistics, building a personal arsenal of knowledge. I was sharpening a weapon they didn't even know existed. At night, alone in my sterile temporary housing, the rain drumming a ceaseless rhythm on the roof, I found solace in the voices of the past. I reread the Stoics, finding strength in their quiet resilience. I recited lines from Epictetus to myself in the dark. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. I didn't need their validation. I just needed an opportunity. My chance came in the form of an intractable problem. An insurgent group in a remote Afghan valley was using a complex system of symbols to communicate, leaving markings on buildings and roadsides that baffled our intelligence analysts. The investigation had stalled completely. As a last resort, they turned to me. They led me to a small, windowless briefing room. The walls were covered in photographs of the symbols, intricate knots, stylized animals, geometric patterns. To the analysts, it was gibberish. To me, it was a language. I recognized the iconography immediately. It wasn't modern code, it was a derivative of pre-Islamic Bactrian folklore, symbols tied to harvest cycles, ancient deities, and territorial spirits. I didn't use algorithms or signal intercepts. I used my knowledge of dead cultures. I explained that the symbol of the coiled serpent didn't mean danger, it meant sacred spring, a hidden water source. The marking of a bird with a broken wing wasn't a threat, but a marker for a concealed mountain pass, a wounded bird's path. 2 days later, using my translations, a special operations team located the insurgents' primary cache and training camp without firing a single shot. They had used my useless knowledge to walk right into the enemy's sanctuary. When I presented my findings in the debrief, the room was silent. The usual clatter of keyboards and murmured side conversations ceased. The colonel, the man who wanted building clearers, looked up at me from his desk. He said nothing, but for the first time, the dismissive smirk was gone. In its place was a look of grudging, astonished respect. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a public commendation. But it was my first victory, a small, quiet win on a long, lonely road. That silent victory at Fort Graymore opened a door I never knew existed. My success with the Bactrian symbols meant my methods, once dismissed as eccentric, were now a subject of official interest. I was summoned to a high-level briefing at the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland, to present my methodology. The briefing room at Fort Meade was another world entirely. Gone was the rugged, practical grit of Fort Graymore, replaced by the sterile, constant hum of supercomputers processing the nation's secrets. The air was cold, smelling of chilled, filtered air and hot electronics. It was filled with sharp-eyed analysts and signals intelligence experts, men and women who lived in a world of encrypted data streams and firewalls. With my focus on the messy, unpredictable nuances of human history, I felt like a poet in a room full of mathematicians, an analog expert in a digital fortress. I delivered my presentation, my voice steady as I walked them through my process, the historical cross-referencing, the iconographic analysis, the deep dive into regional mythology. When I finished, the response was a wave of polite, professional nods. They understood the outcome, the what, but the process, the how, remained a foreign abstraction. They saw the data point, but not the human story behind it. As the room began to clear out, a quiet shuffling of chairs and murmured conversations filling the space, one person stayed behind. He was a senior analyst, a civilian like me, with kind eyes and a calm, steady presence that stood out in the room's high-strung energy. He waited patiently, not looking at his phone or packing a briefcase, just waiting until we were the only two left. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice calm and deep. "Liam Rowe." He offered a warm, genuine handshake. "I have a question about your process. You said you made the initial breakthrough by connecting the insurgent's symbol for a meeting place to a fertility goddess from a 3rd century manuscript. That's not pattern recognition. That's translation on a whole other level." I was stunned into silence for a moment. For years, my work had been judged solely on its product, a piece of intel, a successful mission. It was a binary world of success or failure. But this man, this stranger, wasn't just seeing what I did, he understood how I did it. He saw the scholarship, the deep, intuitive connection between the past and the present. For the first time, I felt not just successful, but truly seen. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe," I managed, my voice a little unsteady. "Liam," he corrected gently. "Would you have time for a coffee, doctor? I'd love to hear more about your work." We ended up at a small off-base diner, the kind of place with worn red vinyl booths and the faint smell of brewing coffee in the air. Over steaming mugs, we talked for hours. It was effortless, a conversation that flowed like a river. I found myself telling him things I hadn't spoken of in years about my grandmother's books, about how she taught me that every ancient culture was a unique key to a different way of seeing the world. He, in turn, spoke of the beauty he found in his own world. He described the elegance of a well-written algorithm, comparing it to poetry, where every line has a purpose and nothing is wasted. He explained how he could identify a hacker by their unique digital fingerprint, the subtle stylistic ticks they left in their code. "A sloppy coder leaves messy footprints," he explained, his eyes lighting up with passion. "An arrogant one uses unnecessarily complex structures to show off. A careful one is almost invisible. It's all a form of language. You just have to know how to read it." "Our worlds are more similar than I thought, Liam," I said, a small, genuine smile forming on my face. "You read machines. I read civilizations. We're both just looking for the story hidden beneath the surface." In that moment, a connection sparked, a sense of kinship I had never once felt with my own brother. With Liam, I wasn't the professor or a disappointment. I was a respected peer, an expert in my field. A few days later, an email from him appeared in my inbox. There was no long message, just a link to an online archive of digitized medieval maps. Below the link, he had typed one short sentence. "Thought you might find these interesting. Found a few stories hidden in the margins." He saw me. He understood the language of my soul. A few months after that, I was working late in a temporary office, buried under a mountain of research for a new assignment. The loneliness in those quiet, Late night hours was a palpable thing, a weight in the silent room. Around 9 p.m., the door opened. It was Liam, holding 2 cardboard containers of what smelled like the best Thai food in Maryland. "Thought you might need this," was all he said. He didn't offer advice or try to solve my problems. He simply pulled up a chair, opened his own container of pad thai, and sat with me in the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, a silent partner in the late-night grind. His presence was a profound statement that spoke louder than any words. You are not alone. It was then I truly understood. Family isn't always about the blood you share. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you're tired and overwhelmed. The ones who see your scars and don't run away. The ones who bring you Thai food on a lonely weeknight and help you piece yourself back together, one noodle at a time. Have you ever felt that? That moment of grace when a friend shows you more kindness and understanding than you've ever known from your own blood? That was Liam. He was the first member of a family I was finally, consciously, choosing for myself. The years that followed my time at Fort Graymore were a quiet blur of progress. My friendship with Liam became my anchor. We were stationed on different continents half the time, but our bond, forged over coffee and code, only deepened. Professionally, my reputation grew. I was no longer the professor, but a respected specialist, a name whispered with a certain mystique in intelligence circles. My work eventually took me to the Saravian Valley, a breathtakingly beautiful but politically volatile region in the Caucasus Mountains. I was there to mediate a delicate dispute between 2 rival ethnic groups over a recently excavated 4th-century monastery, a site sacred to both. It was demanding, fulfilling work. I had built a life for myself, a world away from the long shadow of my family. Then one evening in early December, just as the first snows began to dust the high peaks, my encrypted satellite phone rang. The caller ID flashed a number I hadn't seen in years. General Sterling Blackwood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He had never, not once, called me while I was on assignment. A foolish, stubborn flicker of hope ignited in my chest, a hope I thought I had extinguished long ago. Maybe he heard about my work here, the thought whispered. Maybe he's proud. Maybe after all this time. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Eris." His voice was the same, a baritone of pure, undiluted authority that instantly transported me back to my childhood. "Your brother and I need to speak with you. It's important." Then another voice, slick and smooth, oozing a synthetic warmth that made my skin crawl. "Hey, little sister," Julian said. "Heard you're making waves out there." I almost believed them. For a moment, I let the hope burn brighter. My hope was a candle, and they snuffed it out with a single breath. My father dispensed with the pleasantries immediately. "You're working with a private security contractor out there, Atlas Strategic Solutions. Correct?" "Yes," I answered cautiously. "They provide some of our logistical and site security." "Good," he said. "I have a solid relationship with their CEO. A good man. It seems there's a Department of Defense audit coming down the pipeline. Some allegations about their communication equipment not meeting military-grade standards." A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I knew where this was going. "I need you to influence the after-action report, Eris," he continued, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "Just soften it. Omit a few of the more damaging technical details. Emphasize their positive operational record. It's a small thing. A favor for the family." I was speechless. The audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. He wasn't just asking me to lie. He was asking me to commit a felony. To betray my oath to the government, my team, and the very core of my professional ethics, all to protect one of his business connections. "Dad," I stammered, my voice barely audible. That's illegal. It's an ethical breach of the highest order. I can't do that." The warmth, fake as it was, vanished from his voice, replaced by a familiar, chilling cold. "Don't you dare lecture me about ethics, Eris," he snapped. "I served this country for 40 years. You're a civilian. This is how the real world works. You help us, we help you. Don't forget who gave you that name you trade on." It was a threat wrapped in the guise of a reminder. Then Julian chimed in, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Eris, don't be so naive. Dad is right. This is your chance to finally prove you can be a team player, to be useful to this family for once. And there it was. The truth stripped bare. In their eyes, I wasn't Dr. Thorne, a respected specialist. I was a tool, a pawn on their chessboard to be moved and sacrificed for their own gain. The years of work, the small victories, the life I had painstakingly built for myself, it all meant nothing to them. I was still just the disappointing daughter, finally being offered a chance to be useful. A surge of anger, hot and pure, rose within me. It wasn't the helpless rage of my youth. It was the clear, focused fury of a woman who finally knew her own worth. The lessons from Liam, the strength I'd found in my own solitude, the self-respect I had fought so hard to earn, it all coalesced into a single, unshakable wall of resolve. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting them feel the weight of my decision. Then I spoke one sentence, my voice low, clear, and steady. No. Before either of them could respond, I ended the call. My hand was trembling as I set the phone down. But inside, in the core of my being, something had settled. A line had been drawn. A door had been slammed shut. And this time, I was the one who had turned the key. The line went dead, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. I had defied him. For the first time in my life, I had not bent, not broken, not tried to placate him. I had simply said no. The finality of it hung in the cold Sarabian air. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't know they would come so swiftly or be so brutal. 3 days later, I was leading a final survey of the 4th century monastery with a small team, including 2 local archaeologists. The site was perched on a remote, windswept cliffside, accessible only by a narrow, winding dirt road. The Atlas Solutions communication gear had been glitchy all morning, crackling with static. As we prepared to document a newly uncovered baptismal font, one of the local archaeologists called me overexcitedly. "Dr. Thorne, look at this," he said, pointing to a small, carved stone tablet set into the wall near the font. "I've never seen this marking before." I leaned in. The symbol was unfamiliar, a complex knot I didn't recognize from any of my research. It was strangely personal, a stylized depiction of a starling, a bird I had loved to sketch as a lonely child, a detail only my family would know. A chill, colder than the mountain air, washed over me. It was a bait. Before I could shout a warning, a low groan echoed from the ancient stones above us. The ground shuddered. The entire section of the cliff face where the monastery was carved, destabilized by what I would later learn were precisely placed microexplosives, gave way. It wasn't a natural rockslide. It was a controlled demolition. My military training, the forgotten muscle memory from mandatory hostile environment courses, took over. "Get back!" I screamed, shoving the 2 archaeologists away from the crumbling wall. The world dissolved into a deafening roar of falling rock and splintering earth. A heavy stone block struck my leg, the impact a sickening crunch of bone and tissue. The last thing I saw before the dust and darkness swallowed everything was the smug, triumphant face of my brother, Julian, burning in my mind's eye. This was their answer to my defiance. They hadn't just disowned me. They had tried to bury me. I woke up in a military field hospital, my leg encased in a complex web of metal and plaster. The pain was a roaring fire, but it was nothing compared to the cold, clear rage in my heart. They had tried to kill me, my own family, to protect a business deal, to punish my insubordination. The official report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. The incident was classified as a tragic geological event, a structural failure of the archaeological site. As a result of my injuries, I was being medically evacuated and reassigned for my own safety. It was a lie. I was being exiled, sent to a desk job at the Pentagon Library where I could be silenced and forgotten. That night, alone in my sterile hospital room, I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw a tired woman, her face pale with shock, her body broken. But her eyes were not defeated. They were burning. The simmering anger I had suppressed for a lifetime had finally erupted, forged in the crucible of betrayal and fire into a single, cold, hard purpose. Have you ever been pushed so far, betrayed so deeply, that all the fear inside you burns away and leaves nothing but pure, unyielding resolve? That was me in that moment. I thought of my grandmother's words, "Your mind is your fortress." They had tried to tear it down. Now, I would use it to bring their world crashing down around them. My fortress was about to become my weapon. The real war had just begun. My exile to the Pentagon Library was meant to be a quiet, professional death. They gave me a corral in a forgotten corner, surrounded by dusty archives and a mountain of mind-numbing translation work. They expected me to fade away. They underestimated me. I didn't see a prison. I saw a command center. I didn't waste a single second on self-pity. The fire of my resolve burned too brightly for that. My first and only call was to Liam. Using a secure encrypted channel, I reached him at his post in Germany. "Liam, it's Eris," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need your help. It's off the books. And it's dangerous." I told him everything. The phone call from my father and brother. The demand to falsify a report. My refusal. The accident that followed just 3 days later, and the intimate, cruel detail of the starling symbol. I laid it all out, the cold, ugly facts. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. For a terrifying moment, I feared I had asked too much, that I had dragged my only friend into a mess too vast and too treacherous. Then he spoke, his voice a low, steady anchor in my storm. "Eris," he said, and I could hear the steel in his tone, "I don't care if it's a 4-star general or God himself. No one gets to do that to my friend." He paused, then added, "Send me everything you have. We're going to burn their whole corrupt system to the ground." His loyalty was the only light in my darkness. It was all I needed. We began our war in the shadows. I started with the language of their lies. My grandmother used to say, "Truth has a natural rhythm. Deception is always discordant." My battlefield was hundreds of pages of Atlas strategic solutions, performance reports, and internal communications. On the surface, they were perfect, too perfect. The language was a sterile collection of corporate jargon, operational efficacy, robust performance, minor logistical variances. It was all designed to say nothing while sounding impressive. I began to cross-reference every report with maintenance logs and field complaints, finding dozens of tiny, grammatical errors in their narrative. Equipment failures were logged as user error. Damaged parts were listed as scheduled for routine upgrade. They were building a fortress of words, but I knew how to find the cracks. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Liam launched his own assault. He began a deep dive into the archived data from the Saravian Valley mission. As he suspected, the official record was a lie. The satellite imagery and seismic sensor logs from the day of the rockslide were flagged as corrupted due to a solar flare anomaly. It was a clumsy, obvious attempt at a cover-up. But Liam was a digital ghost, a genius who moved through firewalls and data logs with an artist's grace. He told me later that a cover-up like that is like trying to hide a hole in the snow. The absence of data is itself data. He didn't look at the corrupted files, he looked at the digital space around them. He analyzed the server's backup caches and residual data fragments. And there, in the digital dust, he found it, metadata fragments that pointed to a remote, unauthorized command sent to Atlas's on-site systems just hours before the collapse. The command originated from a private, encrypted server, a server owned by Atlas Strategic Solutions. We worked relentlessly for 2 weeks, fueled by black coffee and a shared, cold fury. We barely slept, communicating through encrypted chats at all hours of the night. Then, at 3 a.m., my secure phone buzzed. It was Liam. His voice was a mixture of exhilaration and pure rage. "I got it, Eris. I got the son of a bitch." He sent me a single, heavily encrypted audio file. My heart pounded as I decrypted it. It was a restored recording recovered from the Atlas server's deep archives. It was a phone call between the CEO of Atlas and my brother, Major Julian Blackwood. The call had taken place just 4 hours before I walked onto that cliffside. I pressed play, and my brother's voice filled the silence of my small library corral. "My father has done his part," Julian was saying, his voice smooth and confident. "The political pressure is on. Now it's your turn. Just make sure the incident is convincing enough to take her off the board permanently. The CEO murmured something about risk. It's not a risk, Julian cut in coldly. It's a solution. My breath hitched. My world tilted on its axis. But there was more. Liam had found another file. It was a digital copy of an emergency slush fund payment, a massive transfer from a Blackwood family trust to an offshore account controlled by the Atlas CEO. The transfer was dated the day after the accident. And the digital authorization signature at the bottom was undeniable. General Sterling Blackwood. I leaned back in my chair, the evidence glowing on my screen. The phone call. The signature. It was the truth, cold, sharp, and brutal. It was the confirmation of a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. My grandmother was right. They had left their discordant notes, and I had heard every single one. My weapon was loaded. With the evidence in my possession, my weapon was loaded. But a weapon is useless without the right battlefield. Going through the standard channels, filing a report with the Inspector General, would have buried the truth under months, possibly years, of bureaucratic red tape. My father and his powerful friends would have suffocated it in the cradle. I needed a different strategy. I needed a stage. So, I made my final move. I compiled the most damning pieces of evidence: the audio file of Julian's call, the digital signature from my father, the network logs from Liam's investigation, into a single, heavily encrypted summary. I didn't send it to the investigators. I sent it directly to the one man I knew valued honor above allegiance, General Maddox. The file was attached to a message with a single line: General, the honor of the service is at risk. I trust you will know what to do. The archivist. For 3 agonizing days, there was nothing but silence. I started to fear I had miscalculated, that I had overplayed my hand. Then a short, formal email arrived in my inbox. Dr. Thorne, your presence is requested at the National Heritage Institute's annual gala and awards ceremony. Formal attire. No explanation. None was needed. I understood immediately. General Maddox wasn't just acknowledging my message. He was setting the stage. The ceremony, an event where my father was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, was not going to be his coronation. It was going to be his tribunal. And I was to be the star witness. I returned to the same grand atrium hall that had been the theater of my greatest humiliation. The air was thick with the same sense of pomp and circumstance, the same sea of dark blue uniforms and elegant gowns. But this time I felt no anxiety. The ghost who had wanted to be invisible was gone. In her place was a woman who was about to become unforgettable. I walked to my assigned seat, my back straight, my gaze level. I felt a profound, chilling calm. I was the quiet eye of a hurricane I had created. From my seat, I could see them in the VIP section. My father, looking regal and proud, accepting handshakes and congratulations. My brother Julian beside him, beaming, soaking in the reflected glory. They were utterly oblivious, confident in their power, never imagining that the pawn they had sacrificed was about to checkmate the kings. The ceremony began. Speeches were made, awards were given. Finally, the moment came. The announcer called my father's name, listing his legendary accomplishments. He walked to the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. After he accepted his award, General Maddox, as the highest-ranking officer present, stepped to the podium to give the closing remarks. He began by praising my father's long career. Then his tone shifted. Before we conclude, he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, there is one more matter of honor to address. An issue of integrity that touches us all. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. General Maddox gestured to the massive presentation screen behind him. There was a recent security incident in the Saravian Valley that resulted in the compromise of a sensitive mission and the serious injury of a civilian specialist. On the screen, a network diagram appeared, the one Liam had painstakingly reconstructed. It showed a clear, undeniable, unauthorized command originating from an Atlas Strategic Solutions server. This incident was deliberately engineered, Maddox continued, his voice like ice. And this crime was facilitated by a massive illicit payment. The screen changed, displaying the financial transfer record. He zoomed in on the authorization signature at the bottom of the page, General Sterling Blackwood. A collective gasp swept the room. My father's face, projected onto the screen by a nearby camera, turned a ghastly shade of white. The confident smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure shock. But Maddox wasn't finished. He gave a subtle nod to the tech booth. And now, the reason for this crime. A sound filled the auditorium. An audio file. It was my brother's voice, cold and clear, echoing through the silent hall. My father has done his part. Now it's your turn. Just make sure that incident is convincing enough to take her off the board permanently. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing void. Every single person in that room, 1,000 pairs of eyes, turned away from the screen and stared directly at my father and brother, who were frozen in their seats like statues in a nightmare. I stood up from my seat and walked to the stage, just as I had been instructed. I stood beside General Maddox and looked down at my family. I saw my brother Julian, his face contorted in panic, trying to stand, to speak, to form a denial that would never come. 2 uniformed military police officers materialized beside him as if from thin air, their presence quiet, professional, and final. Then I looked at my father. I met his eyes across the stage. And for the first time in my 38 years, I did not see anger. I did not see disappointment or disdain. I saw fear. The raw, naked terror of a king who has been dethroned. Of a powerful man who has been utterly and completely exposed. General Maddox did not say another word. He simply turned to me and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. He had given me justice. I returned the nod, a silent thank you. Then I turned and walked away from the podium, my steps steady and sure. I walked past the chaos, past the shocked whispers, past the ruins of the House of Blackwood. I did not look back. I didn't need to. The storm was finally over. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, hollow silence. The days following the gala were a blur of official proceedings. I gave my formal testimony to the investigators from the Inspector General's office, a calm, factual recounting of events. The evidence Liam and I had gathered was irrefutable. The system, once pointed in the right direction by a man with the integrity of General Maddox, began to move with grim efficiency. The aftershock of my actions rippled through the military community. The name Blackwood, once a synonym for honor and legacy, was now whispered with shame and disbelief. I felt a profound sense of relief, the feeling of a crushing weight being lifted from my soul. But underneath it, there was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The war was over, but the battlefield had been my own life, and the casualties were my own family. I had one final encounter with my brother. As I was leaving the investigator's office, I saw him being escorted down the hallway by 2 stone-faced military police. He was in handcuffs, his uniform stripped of its insignia. When he saw me, his face, already pale with fear, contorted into a mask of pure, venomous rage. "Are you happy now, heiress?" he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl as the MPs tightened their grip on his arms. "You destroyed this family. All of it. It was always you, wasn't it? Just a jealous, selfish little bookworm who couldn't stand to see me succeed." His words, which once would have pierced me to the core, now felt like stones thrown against a fortress wall. They bounced off, powerless. I looked at him, at the man who was my brother, and felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. "No, Julian," I said, my voice calm and even. "I didn't destroy our family. I just told the truth. You and Dad destroyed it all by yourselves." I turned and walked away, not looking back, his furious, impotent shouts fading behind me. My father was not arrested immediately. His rank and decades of service afforded him a level of procedural courtesy, but his career was over. His reputation was shattered. His legacy was ashes. He requested to see me. I agreed to one last meeting, not for him, but for me. We met at a quiet cafe in Georgetown, a place with wide windows that looked out onto a gray, overcast sky. He looked old. The ironclad authority had crumbled, leaving behind a stooped, tired man who seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of days. He sat stirring a cup of black coffee, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit fault. Instead, he slid a small, worn leather box across the table. "Eris," he said, his voice raspy, broken. "This was my grandfather's. The Distinguished Service Cross he earned at the Battle of the Bulge. I want you to have it." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. Let's forget all this. We're still family, after all." It was his last move on the chessboard, a final, desperate attempt at manipulation. He was offering me the ultimate symbol of the legacy he had always denied me, a bribe to buy my silence, my forgiveness. He still didn't understand. He thought the prize I had always wanted was his approval, his world, his medal. He never realized that all I had ever wanted was a father. I gently pushed the box back across the table toward him. "I don't need it, General," I said, and the formal title felt both strange and liberating on my tongue. It was the final boundary, a wall I was building brick by brick. Honor isn't something you can pass on in a box. It's in our actions. And your actions, and Julian's, they almost got me killed. I stood up from the table, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the floor. "I hope one day you understand that," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But I can't wait for that day. I have my own life to live now. I wish you well, sir." I turned and walked out of the cafe, out into the cold air, and I did not look back. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. But it was followed by a sharp, aching pang of grief, the phantom limb of a family that was no longer there. I had lost a father and a brother. I had lost the family I was born into. But as I walked down the street, feeling the cold DC air on my face, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had finally, truly found myself. The aftermath of my war was quiet. After the tribunals, the dishonorable discharges, and the prison sentences, a deep silence fell over the House of Blackwood. My father's name was stripped from buildings, his portraits removed from halls of honor. His legacy, the thing he had sacrificed his own daughter for, had turned to dust. I felt no joy in it, only a profound and quiet sense of peace. The heavy chains of expectation and disappointment that had bound me for a lifetime had finally rusted through and fallen away. I was free. I chose to leave the high-stakes world of government consulting behind. On the advice of General Maddox, I accepted a teaching position at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was a world of rolling green hills and earnest, brilliant officers, a world away from the sharp edges of Washington, D.C. and the ghosts of the Saravian Valley. I was tasked with designing and leading a new program, Strategic Empathy and Cultural Intelligence. My own little corner of the institution, built on a foundation of understanding. On my first day, as I walked up to my new office, I saw a small, polished brass plaque on the door. It didn't have my name on it. It simply said, "The Archive." It was a quiet gift from Liam. I stood there for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like years. My legacy would not be a name on a building, it would be a classroom, a place to pass on what I had learned, to ensure that no young officer would ever be made to feel that their intellect was a weakness, or that a weapon that didn't fire bullets was useless. In my first class, I didn't begin with strategy or history. I began with a story, a modified, anonymous version of a mission that nearly failed because of a single, misunderstood cultural gesture. I taught them how to listen not just to words, but to silences. I taught them how to look at an ancient ruin and read the story of the people who lived there. After the class, a young female major, sharp and bright-eyed, stayed behind. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Thank you. No one has ever told us that empathy could be a tactic." In that moment, watching the spark of understanding in her eyes, I knew I had found my true purpose. I hadn't just won my own war. I was now arming a new generation of leaders with the weapons of understanding, weapons that could build bridges instead of just destroying enemies. A year later, a small package arrived at my office. There was no return address, but I recognized the elegant, looping handwriting of my favorite aunt. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation, just a single, faded photograph. It was me at 10 years old, sitting on the floor of our old house in Charleston, completely absorbed in a book of Greek myths, my face a mask of pure concentration and joy. I turned the photo over. My aunt had written a short note on the back. "Your father asked me to send this to you. He didn't say anything else. Only that this is how he wants to remember you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution. But it was an acknowledgement, a quiet admission sent through a third party that the little girl with the books had, in her own way, won. That her path, the one he had scorned and ridiculed, had held a strength he never understood. I took a thumbtack and pinned the photograph to the corkboard in my office, right next to the brass plaque that read "The Archive." The two legacies side by side. I looked at the face of that little girl, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of her loneliness. I felt only pride. I had been healed, not by forgiving them, but by finally, completely, forgiving myself for ever believing I wasn't enough. My story found its peaceful ending not in revenge, but in rediscovering my own worth. But I know my journey isn't unique. So many of us have fought silent battles, feeling unheard or unseen by those who should have cherished us most. I want to ask you, what was the moment you realized you had to choose yourself? What was the first step you took on your own path? Share your story in the comments below. If stories of strength and resilience like mine resonate with you, please subscribe to our channel. Your voice matters, and you are not alone.